fifth largest economy in the world.
If we were our own country, yeah,
All
which some people want to do over here.
right.
Secession.
All right. All right, we're on. Robert, how's it going?
It's going great, Dan. How are you?
Pretty good. Um, so tell me about your campaign. This is an interesting one. I haven't heard this story before. You are a libertarian candidate running for governor as a Democrat. How does that work?
That's a great question. I even get asked that here in California by local libertarians. Um, I guess first off, I was a candidate for president of the United States in 2016. I went to Orlando for the Libertarian Party's national convention, and that was really my first run at any office. Um, and now I'm running for governor of California. I actually participated. The Libertarian Party of California had its annual convention last year in April in Santa Clara, which is not too far from me. It's close to San Jose, not too far south of San Francisco. And I participated in a gubernatorial debate, which was not scheduled, but they wanted to have one. Um, the other two gentlemen who are running as libertarians were there. Uh, my friend Nicholas Wildstar, who's a great guy, and Zoltan Istvan participated. And it was a really good debate. We were just answering questions. And there was a straw poll afterwards, and I did win that poll. Um, Nevertheless, I decided to run as a Democrat. And the reason the reason I did that um, is we have an unusual primary system here in California, and it's pretty new. So even Californians are just really waking up to it. Some people call it a jungle primary. They have this system, I believe, in Louisiana, and I'm not aware that it's in any other state. But the way it works, like in most states, all the political parties choose one candidate in the primary in a summer election. Here it's tomorrow. It's June 5th. Um, but what we have here instead is something that passed a state voter ballot proposition some years ago, on the order of 5 years ago, 4 to 6 years ago, where it's an open primary. Everybody runs. You can pick whatever party you want. The parties have no say whatsoever. And the top two highest vote getters in the primary are the only two on the ballot in November, and write-ins are not allowed in November. So I always tell people that the election is not in November. It's tomorrow. It's in the primary. We narrow it down to two. And what we had in 2016, um, we elected a new senator, Kamala Harris. She's a Democrat. And she and another lady, also a Democrat, finished in the top two in the primary. And so, for the first time in the entire history of the state of California, there was no Republican on the November ballot for United States Senate. And I actually voted not for Kamala Harris, but the other woman who seemed, I didn't really vet them too much, but she seemed the lesser of
The
two
lesser of
evils.
two evils.
And but Kamala won. But Republicans were furious. They wondered why there was no Republican, and they just didn't know the law. And most of the pundits are predicting that we will have two Democrats to choose from for governor in November, and that the top two will be Democrats. And our Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, who's a former mayor of San Francisco, and I live here in Oakland, just across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco, so I'm somewhat familiar with Gavin. And there's another former mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa,
Hmm.
uh, and it's those two gentlemen are expected to be the top two vote getters for tomorrow. And but I had to think a lot. This is different. The calculus around elections is much different when you're a candidate than a voter. And I was thinking in terms of, while I'm certainly a long shot, I play to win generally, and and I know in what esteem libertarians are held in this state and Republicans, and there's a super majority in the assembly here in California for the Democrats and the governor's mansion. We haven't had a Republican governor since Arnold Schwarzenegger about 10 years ago. And arguably he was not really a Republican. So
Right.
um, this is California. If you want to win an election, certainly locally where I live, I mean, I'm just south of Berkeley, you cannot win as a Republican, as a libertarian, or as an
Right.
independent. And I considered all of those options. And I certainly thought I was going to run as a libertarian last year, but when push came to shove and I, was up
So
late at night thinking about it, I decided to go for the win and
right.
dive into,
So
you
this
know,
is interesting because you have a lot of us libertarians and anarchists who are constantly complaining that the system is rigged. But a lot of times when you do something like this, it's like you're playing a strategy that's playing the rigged system, right? Like just by putting that D next to your name, you're going to get a certain amount of extra votes. Um, Whether you win or not is a different story, but you're going to get those votes just because everyone's like, oh, I got to vote for a Democrat. I don't know which one. I just know I like the Democrats, and you're going to get free votes for that. But at the same time, you're going to have a lot of libertarians who are going to say you're a sellout. You went to the Democratic Party and everything else. But what's really interesting is like it's I use the same analogy when I talk about can we take down the system from the inside, because a lot of people say you can't do that, but this is like a Trojan horse maneuver. This is, hey, look at me, I'm a Democrat. Let me into your secret circle of control, and then it's, haha, I'm really a libertarian, and I'm gonna run things the libertarian way. So that's really interesting. But of course, it's always difficult to play that game. A lot of people say Trump did that, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Um, but yeah, so that's really an interesting strategy. Are you getting a lot of support from people within the Libertarian Party for doing this, or are they pushing you away, or do they know you well enough? How's that working out?
Yeah, it's going really well. There hasn't been a single libertarian who's accused me of being a sellout to the Democratic Party, and I've had no contact with the Democratic Party. Um, so my Democrat friends, which are most of my friends here in the San Francisco Bay Area, they love it. And a lot of libertarians have told me that what I'm doing is very clever. And I've even had some LP candidates for statewide offices call me or text me today saying they were voting for me. The check box or the X next to my name and the D for Democrat. And so I've gotten plenty of validation for what I'm doing. I think people
Awesome.
people can see the kind of Trojan horse, populist.
Right.
This is not a moral victory for the LP, and I still have a fair amount of loyalty. I haven't burned any bridges with the LP. Nobody's called
That's
me
that's really
anything
good to
like that.
hear, because you have I guess Rand Paul is Ron Paul light to begin with, but Ron Paul's even been accused of being kind of a deserter because he's been with the with the Republican Party for so long, and he introduced me to the Libertarian Party, so I think that's kind of unfair. So I'm glad to see that so far you've still got your libertarian support, because I think that's really important that people understand what your actual philosophy is on things. So let's actually talk about that. What do you see as the future of California? What's kind of your strategy? What if you're elected? What would you actually try to do to fix California's problems?
Well, whenever I've run for office and people ask me what I'm about, what I want to do, I just want people to be safer and more prosperous. And government's doing much more harm than good. And so California's problems are principally financial in nature. And we have, you know, the regulation here is off the charts, the red tape. The taxes are really high on gasoline, state income taxes. We've got a housing shortage. We've got a huge boom in the homeless population, which I see daily. And so, my background is in a lot of things, but it's in economics, engineering, and business. So I took a look at the state budget. I saw how much debt we're carrying here. Over 20% of the state's budget is paying interest on the debt, and that percentage is only going to increase. And politicians and bureaucrats are very hesitant to share just how much debt the state has gotten into, particularly in the last 10 years or so under Governor Jerry Brown. And it's anywhere from several hundred billion to, I've heard reports of at least $3 trillion. And I just kind of go with 2 trillion as a round number. And so we need to get our financial house in order. So
So,
I looked at the debt, and yeah, so my target is to basically get rid of the debt.
so do you
And
have an actual
I
plan
can
for
speak.
that?
Yeah, my plan is to restructure it, not unlike a bankruptcy, but this would not be a bankruptcy. We would just willfully pay some of the bonds, but not others. We would willfully default on a fair amount of the bonds, and I just don't think the state has any business spending more than it takes in. The state takes in 500 billion a year in taxes, and 100 billion a year of that goes towards interest on the debt. So that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think we have
So
to tackle the debt before anything else.
So this is interesting because I've heard this was my strategy for my presidential campaign, but I've also heard a couple other gubernatorial candidates say the same thing, that I think one of them used the term bankruptcy or defaulting, but we're talking about now saying we're not going to pay this debt. And so this is actually becoming a more popular idea. And I guess, there are some good things to that. Like, people are going to freak out and say, oh, but our credit rating is going to drop. Kind of like, there's a big thing when when the U.S. credit rating dropped from AAA to AA or something.
Hmm.
That's a good thing, I think, because then the lenders are going to say, well, you got a lower credit rating, we're going to give you less money, which means less debt. That means these politicians basically aren't going to be able to borrow more money.
Right, and I don't want to borrow. And frankly, if I finish in the top two tomorrow, California's bond rating will go to F. If not right away within days. I mean, it would be bigger than the election of Donald Trump, you know, a year and a half ago. Our bond rating would take a hit, and certainly if I won in November, um, I really can't even imagine exactly how it would play out. But yeah, once you actually default on a single bond, I mean, that would shock the world. And
That makes
yeah,
all
to
the
me, this
lenders
is a very
say, we're like, I don't want to lend any money. We don't know what this guy's going to do. He's crazy. He might not pay any of us back. Well, let's not lend them any more money. And I think that's really, like it forces Congress to say, hey, we got to balance this fucking budget because nobody's going to give us the extra money if we can't. It's brilliant. It's
yeah,
like, I don't know why nobody's done this before, but it's,
yeah. It's a little, I there's a song lyric I really like that I like to apply to libertarians. The problem with libertarians is not that they're half crazy; it's that they don't go all the way. And yeah, there's I think you and I discussed this by text in the last week or so. So there's an Austrian school economist named Jeff Hummel who's on the Rubin Report from time to time. I think he did a piece on Abe Lincoln within the year, and he's been advocating default on the national debt for 25 years. And I spoke with him in March, and it never even occurred to him to do that at the state level. But when I ran some of California's numbers by him, he was like, "Yeah, I bet it does make sense." So it's kind of music to my ears that you've heard other gubernatorial candidates from other states. I haven't heard it here from anyone else talking about default, or I use word restructuring. Bernie Sanders used the word forgiveness when he was talking about student loan debt. We really need to take the state of California and the country back, because we're all paying through the nose in taxes, and the investment banks are underwriting this debt over and over. and all this interest is going. The people who buy these bonds, whether they know it or not, are funding what is essentially a criminal enterprise of stealing money from poor people. That's
Right.
basically what I see governments do. So,
And
we really need to look at the meat and potatoes of this problem. It starts with debt. You've obviously come to a similar conclusion, and I think it's going to gain more momentum. And
yeah,
it's just common sense. It's not even a uniquely libertarian, anarchist idea. It's just common sense. It can never be paid. So
it
why are we paying
is.
interest
I
on
mean, families who are, they're completely like sunken in debt. They file for bankruptcy. It's a thing that they do to clear their debts. Why can't the government do it? And why can't this be, when you file for bankruptcy because you've got like $100,000 in credit cards, maybe you started a business and it failed and it's not making the money you thought it would. You file for bankruptcy. You can't borrow money for the next 7 or 15 years, but you're out of that debt, and that's a good thing. You're forced to live within your means for a certain period of time, because that's the whole thing. You don't borrow money so that you can live, so you can increase your lifestyle. You borrow money to invest, to get some sort of return, and that's something the government doesn't get, because they can just borrow and borrow and borrow. And their return is our income, which is, you mentioned that these banks are basically lending to a criminal organization. And let's take the mafia as just a hypothetical example, right? And the head of the mafia goes into a bank and says, hey, let me borrow a bunch of money. And the bank says, okay, can you prove your income? And the mafia says, yes, look at my bank account, I have all this income coming in. And so the bank says, okay, it looks like you've got a good solid income, I'm going to lend you $10 million, right? They go out, they
it.
take this money, they invest it in, whatever, buying things that help them steal money better. And they
Hmm.
increase their income, because now they're hiring more goons to go around and beat people up and take their money, and sell protection insurance and all this other stuff. They've increased their income. They go back to the bank and they say, give me another 20 million. And the bank does it because they see they've got this income. Now, at some point, this racket is going to get shut down. Everyone's going to realize it's a criminal enterprise. It's going to get shut down, and the bank's going to be sitting there crying, "Oh, but they owe us money. You can't stop them from stealing from people because they owe us money." And that's what the government's doing. They're trying to say, we just need to keep stealing. Just let us keep stealing, and we can pay off the bank loans. But it's like,
Hmm.
that's not our problem. We're not the criminal enterprise that was stealing to show this false income. We're not the criminal enterprise that borrowed this money that we don't even have a job to pay back. Why doesn't Congress have a job? They don't produce anything. They don't have any real income. So if you look at it that way, it's kind of like this whole system it's criminal, and we're just kind of like at the short end of the stick, saying, oh yeah, you guys got to pick up the debt because we don't have a job. It doesn't make
Right.
any sense. So
Somebody has to point these things out. That's what leaders do, and libertarians and anarchists are in a unique position where psychologically we're prepared to pathologize this, whereas most people are kind of doe-eyed sometimes when they think of the state. So we can look more critically and just name the elephant in the room. It's obvious. There's no question. And the people, politicians and bureaucrats, it's amazing to me how ignorant they are. They either don't know, don't care. I mean, the lunatics are running the asylum in politics, not just, it's not just California. It's everywhere. So we need responsible citizens to step up, to punch through the establishment. And in certain ways, Bernie Sanders was a manifestation of that, an independent who tried, to win the Democratic nomination from Hillary, and he darn near did it. And Trump just completely schooled the entire Republican establishment.
Yep. Oh, did I lose you? Are we still connected?
And we just need. Yeah, something just happened. I can still hear you.
Okay. I think we might have lost our connection for a second there, but we're back. Um, if you guys are watching and this dropped out a little bit, don't worry. I always keep a recording and upload it afterwards. So if anything, because Facebook is really bad, it drops the connection all the time. Of course, my internet doesn't help, but so let's talk about this. You were telling me about this kind of crazy plan that you have to buy votes. Tell me about this.
Yeah, so if you Google this, paying people to vote, there are a lot of publications and people that are advocating that we pay people to vote. And there actually is a precedent set for this in Australia. Voter turnouts were so low in Australia at one point that they actually started paying people $200 to vote. And what they did is they taxed everybody $200 and then they comped them $200, but only if they voted. Because their election, the turnout was getting to be like less than 10%. The elections weren't looking legitimate. The government wasn't looking legitimate. So, of course, they need to cajole people into voting. And people are talking about doing it here. So what I thought of doing was paying everybody $400 to vote, regardless of who they vote for. Just vote. Now I've challenged all my. There are 27 people running for governor in California, and there was one year where it was almost 90. But I've challenged them all to match me on this, to help people out, encourage them to vote, to get turnout up, and nobody's matched me. So for the time being, and the election's tomorrow, so, you know, if you want that $400, you're going to have to vote for me because I'm going to have to win for you to get the money. So there is kind of an implied vote for me and get $400, but that's not really how I pitch it. And I want it to go to everybody. It would kind of be really brave to say only if you voted for me. Um, but I mentioned some of the people with money, the front runners, the people in the polls. There's one front runner in particular who has 50 to 100 million dollars to spend on this election, and that money comes from special interests who profit in the tens of billions of dollars for their small investment to candidate for governor. So rather than having crooks buy the election, I'd rather have the people buy the election and get a good candidate, and they would get um, a common sense Democrat and myself instead of two criminal Democrats to choose from in November, which is what they're going to get if they choose the two former mayors of San Francisco and Los Angeles, respectively, who are both known cheats
So
and liars.
I have to ask this question because this comes up a lot, and it's kind of like, okay, the government's stealing this money anyway, and you're offering a way to really give some of it back to people who participate, but you have people who are still going to refuse to participate. I don't want to vote. I don't want any part of that system. Um, but you're still taking money from one group of people, giving it to another group of people. How do you figure that that's doesn't violate the NAP, that's something legitimate to do within the libertarian circle?
Well, I think running as a Democrat, sort of at least temporarily severing from the Libertarian Party. I mean, psychologically, it's allowed me to think outside the box. As a candidate, you need to be a populist. You need to do what it takes to win. And the system is the way it is. And there's certain things that just can't be changed, at least not right away. So to me, the first order of business in getting the fiscal house in order is to eliminate the debt. Then I can worry about cutting taxes. Although I do have one tax cut in my platform. So, I can't snap my fingers and create, Ann Capistan, the first day I take office. I have to deal with certain realities, and I'm going to need every bit of tax money to allow me to do this debt default plan because the cash flow's got to be positive. You can't be short in your accounts when you're running an entire state. So it's kind of first things first, and you kind of have to be patient with your ideals, and we'll get to privatizing courts and police, not even in a 4-year term. So those kinds of anarchist ideals are going to have to wait. We're going to have to do things in a certain order. We're going to have to do things that are politically realistic, and there are $500 billion a year stolen from Californians, mostly the poor. So it's almost a symbolic gesture to say, here, you can have $4 billion of that 500 back to you, because Gavin Newsom is going to take, let's say, $50 million from corrupt real estate speculators who buy up land along this high-speed rail project which is a joke, between San Francisco and LA. And those guys make tens of billions of dollars per year on that kind of thievery. So am I, in theory, stealing, still stealing the 500 billion? Well, at least I'm giving 4 billion back, and that's just beginning. And part of it, yeah, is to get elected. I mean, my job as a candidate is not just to have a great plan. I have to get myself elected, and I think there, H.L. Mencken is a popular a media guy from the 20th century that libertarians love to quote. He was quite libertarian, and he said that all elections are a kind of advanced auction on stolen goods. That's what it is, and I think most of your viewership would probably agree with that. So, given that that's the status quo and I can't change it right away, how can I play that game to get me elected so that I can cut taxes, not enforce any regulations, get rid of the debt, and do that other stuff? It's one thing to speculate on this in social media, and it's another thing to run for office and to be in office. And I forced myself to have to think about those things because I'm running. I'm on the ballot.
Right. So let's talk about for a minute. You said that there is a tax cut that you already have in your platform. What is that?
Well, the only tax cut I'm proposing, and this would have to be passed by the Assembly, but in theory, I could do that with the Democratic supermajority and with the mandate of a victory in the election. So my tax cut would take the California state corporate income tax, whatever the brackets are on that, and just cut them in half, but only for small business. And when I say small business, I've thrown around numbers like 2,000 employees or less. I want to include, most of the farm industry, at least the small farm industry, not necessarily the Monsantos. Because more than half of the United States economy and the California economy is small business. Those people are hurting. They're hurting from regulation and taxes much more than the larger companies that get all the tax write-offs. So I want to throw those people a bone and cut their taxes. All the business owners and all their employees will benefit immensely. And so that just seems like the first thing to do. It helps me get elected. It helps the economy. And that just seems to be the smartest, most viable, and it's a good political tax cut as well. It lets those people know, because a business owner is not going to care about $400 to vote. It might even offend them. But a 50% tax cut, that's going to be right in their wheelhouse.
So
you'll love that.
So this is interesting because you talk about how the poor are taxed the worst, but you want to cut the tax on the small businesses. Why not just cut the tax on the individual income tax? Or why not both?
Well, I don't really the tax base too much. It's also not politically feasible. I mean, we'd really be pulling our revenue stream right out from under us if we did a major income tax cut, and that would just drive up the deficit and the debt, and this whole plan to restructure the debt wouldn't be feasible if we're cutting taxes too sharply from the get-go. So again, it's kind of a first things first. We have to get our financial house in order before we do things like the tax cuts. Like, I like Trump's tax cuts. The only problem is he's running up the deficit. It'll be $30 trillion by the end of his term.
Well, so as we say about Trump's, you can't cut taxes without cutting spending. Are there any expenses that you would cut, or any programs?
I'm not running on any program cuts. I mean, I have line item veto for the budget. So this boondoggle of the high-speed rail project, I would unwind that project as quickly as I could without hurting people unnecessarily. There's tens of billions saved right there. The debt restructuring saves us up to $100 billion a year. So I want to cut that first before I start talking about improving services. And when I say improving services, that's going to be better and more services at a much lower cost, which is going to be voluntarily funded instead of being funded through taxes. So that's going to involve a more privatization of charity, which I think is more consistent with libertarian and anarchist principles. But if I talk that kind of stuff to the general population of California, there's no way I'm going to get elected. So you got to keep it simple. build the wall and make Mexico pay for it. It's really, I'm going on the debt and the $400, and I can talk about tax cuts and I can talk about regulations, but I want to keep it simple, populist, and my top two things. Everybody told me you should run as a Democrat on those, because Democrats don't care about not paying bondholders, and they'll take a $400 handout without missing a heartbeat. Um, Not so much the highly educated, highly professional ones, but more the low information voter who has a lot more common sense and votes in their own self interest.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm trying to think if I have any other questions for you. I know the election is coming up tomorrow, and it's we've actually had the two other candidates that you mentioned. We had on the show before, and we've really talked about how the votes are possibly going to be really divided between 27 candidates. So it's what's really interesting is that's giving whether it's a third party candidate or a lesser known candidate, it's really giving you kind of a level playing field, because it's possible that a lot of people who don't know who they're voting for aren't going to vote for the big names. But of course you have like Villagrosa, who's well known. A lot of people are just going to see his name and just say, oh, I know that guy, vote, without knowing any of the policies or anything, because that's just how people vote. But it's really interesting to see that how this whole thing is going to play out. Is there anything else you want to say as far as to the libertarian? It sounds like I mean, if people were to ask me based on what you said, is your pitch libertarian? I would say no, not especially. But it sounds like you do have an undertone of, yes, but I am libertarian, so don't worry about that. Just trust me. Let's get over this hump. Get me in there, and we'll do some stuff. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, my top two, the debt and the $4 billion, $400 a vote thing, are very populist. That's very Bernie Sanders, very Donald Trump even. And but they're not inconsistent with Austrian school economics, libertarianism, or even an anarchist who wants to take it one step at a time. The other parts of my platform, and I can just bullet point them real quick. This third one is a lot like the first two. I would veto all legislation. I wouldn't pass a single bill. I wouldn't sign a single bill other than annual budgets, because all legislation is extra constitutional and corrupt.
Sorry, my dogs.
I would not enforce any regulations, because regulations are strangling this economy and creating a housing crisis. So again, regulations are extra constitutional. I just like simple law consistent with the NAP. Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. So, I would put a guy like Adam Kokesh. Do you know who Adam is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I put a guy like Adam Kokesh in charge of regulations, they won't be enforced. The small business tax cut, business licensing, anybody who wants a license and collect sales tax can have one. So that would be a boom for small business. I would end the drug war. The state would not enforce or help the feds in any way in enforcing any drug law. The legalization of marijuana, which happened 2 years ago here, it's still highly regulated and taxed. So you wouldn't need a permit. The sales tax would be normal, so that would be big. In terms of cutting taxes, not enforcing regulations, not signing any of these very statist bills, it's straight up libertarian. I'm just not running at the highest level on those libertarian principles, but they're there. I mean, I was in a Free and Equal, had Christina Tobin's organization. Free and Equal had a debate Friday night. It was over 3 hours. Nicholas Wildstar and I were there, and two other third-party candidates. I'm a Democrat, of course. And it was very clear who the anarcho-capitalist libertarian was. I mean, I was not mincing words, and Nick is a terrific libertarian, but even he was like wide-eyed at some of the things I was saying. So, but yeah, I'm trying to stay populist, trying to stay common sense, because I'm running in a general election. I'm not preaching to an anarchist libertarian choir. So I have to maintain my integrity, but also do kind of do what it takes to win as well. And I feel very comfortable with what I'm doing. I haven't had to sell my soul, I don't think, in any way.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I mean that sounds fair, and I don't think you've said anything as crazy as free ponies or free healthcare. Um, so I think we're good there. You did mention this. Well, so there's a couple questions I have because well, first I want to talk about this high speed rail real quick. Is this the Hyperloop or is this a different rail program that we're talking about?
This was the voters passed a measure 10 years ago, and it's been conceived much longer than that. And of course, it's just a scam to make people money. This is like selling the space race or whatever to people. They figure they're not paying for it. They pass it, and it comes back to haunt us. So the construction's been going on for the last 6 years. They're tearing up all the land from Fresno on south, and it's just a mess. The Bay Bridge, the east span, was redone here some years ago, and it was like 5 or 10 years late, tens of billions of dollars over budget or something like that. And this high-speed rail project is no different.
So
And Antonio Rygos is actually running on supporting it, which is pretty
so
crazy.
if it's been kind of in place for 10 years, have they actually built any, like, is there anything you can get on and ride or like is there anything to show for it or just buying land and
It's a bridge to nowhere. It's a total bridge to nowhere. And Travis Allen, a Republican, has said he would just totally pull the plug on it. But I had conversations with Ralph Artabedian, who is a Pulitzer-nominated senior reporter for the LA Times, and he quoted me in his May 16th article. He and I had a 40-minute discussion on my campaign and the high-speed rail project, and he's been, quite critic of that project. He really wanted it, but he's criticized the rampant corruption around it, and it's a perfect example of the state being violence, the state being theft. But a lot of people are fooled by it. Most people are statists, and they get all go-ahead about a high-speed rail project. But it's just a bunch of corrupt politicians and their funders making money off, the taxpayer. And, so I've shined a light on that. And, I try to do it in a fairly populist, common-sense manner. And I leave some of the libertarian rhetoric, for conversations between me, you, and your taxation is theft friends, because I just don't feel like I can run that way, unfortunately.
right? Yeah, it's kind of California is a weird place. I talk about it all the time because I grew up there. I still have friends and family there, and their views on taxes, a lot of them are surprisingly just they love paying their taxes for some reason. And they, it's always, no matter how wealthy they are, it's the wealthier guy that should be paying more. So that's pretty interesting. But so something else that you mentioned, I want to ask you about this because you said that you would basically, it sounds like you're saying you would refuse to enforce some of the laws, which I like that idea. But I've heard from a lot of libertarian candidates, whether they're running for governor or sheriff or district attorney, various positions, that they say that, I ask them, well, would you just refuse to enforce any of these laws? And they say, well, I'm being elected to enforce the laws of the land and the Constitution, and they go into this whole rhetoric saying basically, no, I don't care whether I agree with them or not. I'm going to enforce them because that's my job. I'm going to be just doing my job. And so I want to hear your take on whether that's legal, whether that's ethical. Do you think you're going to have any problems where the people are going to come around and say we're going to get the attorney general after you, we're going to get you impeached, we're going to file federal lawsuits? Are you worried about any of that?
Not really. I know it's a real thing. I get asked that a lot by libertarians. I think libertarians I'm going to say this, are wimps about it. They are not willing to stick their necks out and break rules the way guys like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are willing to. There's the law through common law, and then there's laws passed by legislatures and signed by executives, and then there's all this extra constitutional regulation. And there's so many regulations that they can't be enforced, and they're enforced rather selectively, as is the law. So executives have a great deal of discretion in how much laws are enforced. So to me, this is just simple messaging to the people, because I know home builders that they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't with regulations, and so they just don't build. But if they get the simple message they won't be enforced, then they will understand that they'll be able to build and much cheaper and without having to meet rules that can't be met. So somebody has to put their foot down and stop the nonsense. So
I I really like
there are
that
all
because
kinds of ways to speak. So, with lawyers, I'm not going to do anything that's going to get me thrown out of office or put in jail. But you instead of just saying, oh, there's nothing we can do about it, our hands are tied, everybody's saying that. So somebody's got to step up and just say no. And I'm doing that, and I'm willing to go to the mat for it.
right.
And take some risks.
We have, I mean, everything from, the separation of three branches of government. You have your the purpose of that supposedly was so that if Congress passed unconstitutional laws, you would have sheriffs and governors and district attorneys who would say, we're not going to enforce that, that's unconstitutional. You'd have I mean, that's kind of the idea there. And then you have, everything from prosecutorial discretion. You have things like, hey, you know what? There's so many crimes, but we only have so many police. We're going to focus on rape and murder and burglary instead of focusing on drug charges. And that can easily be your excuse for not prosecuting drug charges. And it's really good to hear you say that, because that sets aside everything about not cutting the taxes, because really that's the part where you pick people up and you throw them in cages, or you use some random regulatory excuses to say, hey, we're going to take even more of your money. And we're going to shut down your business, and we're going to make your life miserable. This is really where the rubber hits the ground. And it's really refreshing to hear someone say, yeah, no, I'm not going to enforce that.
Yeah, he's done. You have to be bold. Bernie and Donald Trump were bold, and look how well they did. So this kind of meek, oh, we got to follow the rules. Libertarians cannot be that way, because our principles, which are consistent with the founders and most Americans, dictate that we can't just play, by the rules. We just need to be somewhat discreet and careful about it. We can't be too blustery.
Right. And
you have to pick up.
I gotta say, that's the tiebreaker right there. That's something I haven't heard before, or not very often anyway. So that's if I was in California, I would have to say that's what would probably get my vote. So it's really good to hear that. Anyway, guys, let's wrap this up. But I think you've had a lot of really interesting points to make. The California election is tomorrow. This is the primary. Go in, check out all the candidates. We've had two of the Libertarian candidates, and now this Libertarian Democrat, Robert, who sounds like he's got a pretty awesome plan. So if you're in California, make sure you get out and vote tomorrow. Whatever you do, don't vote for the big corrupt guys. I'll give you that. That's the most direct voting instruction I'm going to give you. But definitely consider Robert, because it sounds like he knows what he's doing, and he's gonna do some good things. Any final words?
Not really. Just taxation is theft, and do what you can to increase liberty in your personal life and your political life. Get active if you can. Either as an agorist or in the LP, or just vote.
Yep. And if you like any of these ideas, share them with your Congress people, share them with your representatives and everybody else, because ultimately I've heard I've heard some good libertarians say, if at the very least we make our ideas popular, so popular that even the real Democrats and the real Republicans take these ideas and run with them and make them happen, then we win. We don't need to get elected to make that happen. So
Yeah, just real quick, there's a real vacuum in leadership in the major political parties. Trump schooled the Republican, Bernie and Hillary. Democrats are dying for somebody new and younger to take that hill. It's an open hill. There's nobody on it. So I'll take it.
awesome. Yeah, and if you're interested in becoming a politician and changing it from the inside, so to speak, if you want to be that Trojan horse, definitely get active and do something. Because otherwise these knuckleheads are just going to sit there and run the show.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. The analogy, just real quick, the analogy I use is Jonah and the whale from the Bible. Go into the belly of the beast. It's not everybody's path, but
Yeah.
it's mine because I'm running, and
Yeah.
that's one way to
And
get
yeah, and
change.
if we just ignore it, it's not going to go away. There's a lot of people who say let's just not vote, but that's, to me, that's just ignoring the problem and closing your eyes, burying your head in the sand, and hoping the problem goes away. But it's not going to that way. There's always going to be somebody who says, "Oh, I can just run the show," and then there's less competition and there's less people telling them to shut the hell up because they don't know what they're talking about. So, all
Yeah,
right, Robert.
100% is showing up. So we got to show up.
Absolutely. All right, Robert. It's been great talking with you, and we'll talk again sometime, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Taxation
thank you
is
very
theft.
much, Daniel. Appreciate it.
All right. I'll see you later.
Take care.